Some wars announce themselves with speeches and parades. Others arrive quietly, wrapped in paperwork, radio static, and decisions made in rooms far from the gunfire. The chilling truth is that some of the most powerful moments in modern history were shaped by forces the public never saw, guided by operations that officially never happened, and paid for by men whose names were never meant to be remembered. In the highlands of Vietnam, near a forgotten airstrip carved out of red earth, an invisible hand closed into a fist, and the men inside it were U.S. Marines at a place called Sanh. To the outside world, Sanh was a dot on a map, a remote combat base near the Laotian border, surrounded by jungle and mist, miles from anywhere most Americans could pronounce. To the planners and analysts watching from afar, it was something else entirely. A symbol, a test, a potential trap. The decisions that led Marines there were shaped by intelligence estimates, political calculations, and the unspoken need to control a narrative without ever admitting how much was at stake. Black operations are often misunderstood. They are not just secret missions carried out in the dark. They are actions designed to exist in a space where accountability dissolves, where involvement can be denied, and where the truth can be adjusted to fit the moment. They blur the line between what happened and what is allowed to be acknowledged. While Sanh was no black op in the traditional sense, it sat at the intersection of deniability and spectacle. The enemy wanted it to be a decisive victory. American leadership wanted it to be a calculated stand. And the Marines on the ground were left to live inside the tension day after day, under constant fire. Absolute deniability matters to agencies and governments because it preserves freedom of movement. It allows leaders to maneuver without consequence, to test the enemy, to signal strength or restraint without ever speaking the words aloud. But deniability comes at a cost. Someone has to stand in the open, exposed to the consequences. At Sanh, the cost was measured in mud, blood, and the slow erosion of the human spirit. The base sat on a plateau ringed by hills, each one a potential firing position. The North Vietnamese army knew the terrain. They moved through it like ghosts. They dug trenches, tunnels, and bunkers, inching closer every night. By January of 1968, tens of thousands of enemy troops surrounded the base. The siege had begun. For the Marines, the days blurred together. The sound of incoming artillery became a constant presence, like weather. The ground shook so often that men stopped reacting to the first explosion. Dust filled the air, coating weapons, food, lungs. The smell of cordite mixed with damp earth and unwashed bodies. Sleep came in fragments, stolen between barrages. Fear was no longer a spike of adrenaline. It was a steady pressure, a weight carried in the chest. Every resupply was a gamble. Aircraft screamed in low, dropping pallets of food, ammunition, and medical supplies while enemy guns reached up to swat them from the sky. Sometimes the drops missed. Sometimes they landed in enemy territory. Sometimes they landed right, and men ran from them under fire, knowing that tomorrow depended on what they could drag back today. The enemy's goal was clear: break the base, crush the Marines, deliver a psychological blow that would echo far beyond the hills of Sanh. For American command, the goal was more complicated. Hold the line, bleed the enemy, prove that the United States could withstand a siege without another Dien Bien Phu. The symbolism mattered. The messaging mattered, and so the Marines stayed. Beyond the bark of public statements and official briefings was a different reality. Specialized reconnaissance teams slipped beyond the wire at night, moving through tall grass and shadow, listening for whispers of movement, counting footsteps, mapping gun positions. They were trained to observe without being seen, to report without being detected. Their missions were quiet, precise, and deadly serious. A single mistake could mean capture or death. If they disappeared, there would be no announcement, just an empty space in the roster and a few men who understood what that silence meant. Inside the perimeter, artillery crews worked until their hands bled. They fired so many rounds that the barrels glowed, the recoil jarring teeth and bones. Forward observers climbed into exposed positions, scanning the hills through binoculars, calling in fire with calm voices while rounds cracked overhead. Medics moved from crater to crater, treating wounds with shaking hands, trying to keep men alive long enough to get them to a field hospital that might not exist tomorrow. The siege pressed inward not just physically, but mentally. Marines began to measure time by attacks rather than hours. Breakfast after a night assault, lunch before the next barrage. Letters from home arrived sporadically, sometimes weeks late, sometimes torn or burned. They were read and reread until the words blurred, until the paper felt softer than anything else in that harsh landscape. Command decisions filtered down as orders, stripped of context. Hold this position. Repair the bunker. Move now. The why was often unspoken. Somewhere, far away, analysts debated the meaning of the siege. Was it a diversion for a larger offensive? A genuine attempt to seize ground? A psychological operation on a grand scale? The Marines did not have the luxury of speculation. For them, every theory ended the same way. Stay alive. Protect the man next to you. The enemy artillery was relentless. Shells fell day and night, sometimes walking methodically across the base, sometimes crashing down without pattern. Bunkers collapsed, trenches filled with water and blood. Men learned to read the whistle of incoming rounds, to tell how close they would land by the sound alone. Even so, there was no real safety, just degrees of exposure. Air power became both savior and a reminder of isolation. B-52 strikes thundered in the distance, the ground trembling as bombs fell miles away, tearing enemy formations apart. It was overwhelming force unleashed on coordinates marked by unseen hands. The Marines could feel it more than see it, a deep, rolling concussion that rattled the chest. It was proof that someone, somewhere, was still paying attention. But it also underscored the distance between those who called in the strikes and those who waited for the next wave. As the weeks dragged on, fatigue set in, not the kind cured by sleep, but a deeper exhaustion that hollowed men out. Jokes grew darker, tempers shortened. Still, the line held, not because of slogans or speeches, but because of small, stubborn acts. A Marine sharing the last cigarette, another staying awake so his buddy could rest, someone standing up in a trench, exposed, just long enough to draw fire away from a wounded man. In late January, while the siege raged, the Tet Offensive exploded across South Vietnam. Cities erupted, bases were attacked, the war's narrative shifted overnight. Khe Sanh, once the center of attention, became part of a much larger storm. Some argued it had all been a feint, a way to draw American forces away from population centers. Others believed the enemy truly intended to overrun the base. The truth, as always, was tangled. But for the Marines, the timing changed nothing. The shells kept falling. The hills stayed occupied. The orders remained the same. There is a moment in every prolonged battle when fear gives way to something quieter. Not courage in the cinematic sense, but acceptance. An understanding that survival is no longer guaranteed and that worrying about it wastes energy needed elsewhere. Many Marines at Khe Sanh reached that point. They stopped counting days. They focused on tasks. Load, fire, dig, watch, repeat. Casualties mounted. Faces disappeared from the perimeter, replaced by new ones who looked just as tired within hours. Medevac helicopters braved fire to lift the wounded out, rotors chopping the air, crews exposed and opened doors. Sometimes they made it, sometimes they didn't. The dead were wrapped, tagged, and moved when possible. When not, they waited. By April, the siege began to loosen. Enemy pressure eased. Roads were reopened. Operation Pegasus broke through to the base. After 77 days, the immediate threat lifted. The Marines had held. Strategically, tactically, symbolically, the outcome could be debated. Historians still argue over what Khe Sanh meant, victory or distraction, stand or mistake. Those debates happen in classrooms and books, far removed from the red earth and shattered bunkers. What cannot be debated is the human cost. The men who endured Khe Sanh carried it with them long after they left the plateau. In the way they startled at loud noises, in the silence they kept about certain memories. and the faces they still saw when they closed their eyes. The invisible hand that shaped the siege moved on, as it always does. Priorities shifted, narratives evolved, official focus drifted elsewhere, but the ground remembers, and so do the Marines. Sanh stands as a reminder that behind every strategy, every deniable decision, every carefully worded statement, there are individuals who bear the weight of outcomes they never chose. Men who held the line not for abstractions, but for each other. In the end, the legacy of Sanh is not found in maps or memos. It lives in the quiet endurance of those who stood there, surrounded, and refused to let the line break.